Welcome back to Paranormal Roundtable. I'm your host, Josh Turner, and with me is my guest and, of course, my co-host, Martin Nunley. And we got a lot to talk about, so let's jump right back into it and let's continue. Thank you.
And what about the other creatures that you saw later? Did they have the same type of human-like head or different?
They're the ones I seen. I can tell you the encounter I had was by accident, complete accident. There was a place on the Cumberland River that I had fished for years since I was a little boy, even with my dad and my uncles and even my friends from high school. We would go there after baseball or football practice and fish in the evening, and even fish 12, 1 o'clock in the morning a lot of times on the weekends. And it's on the Cumberland River, and we would park in our old sewer plant, and we'd have to walk a trail all the way down behind it. We knew the people that worked there, and they didn't mind us parking back there. And nobody hardly fished back there but us, because I really don't think people knew that you could fish back there. But we parked there, and then we'd have to walk down this trail, and it was pretty clear trail. You could see where you were going until you got down to the spot we fished. And you had to, when you got to that, it was kind of like the river's kind of a mud bank that goes all the way down. This particular spot was a mud bank, and on top that we sat on, and then it kind of went down maybe a good 5 or 6 feet before it got to the water. And then it was part of a sandbar sticking up that attached to it that went out into the river that disappeared. It was kind of a little point that we fished on, but it was about 300 yards roughly back in there till we got to the spot. And I'd actually, like I said, been fishing there for a lot of years, even as a kid, 9 or 10 years old. I went there with my dad to fish and my uncles, but that was my second encounter. I went out, and my dad was supposed to go with me that day, but he decided he wasn't feeling real good, and he was just going to stay home. So I went to the spot to fish, and I parked my car. At that time, I had a car, and I got my gear, and I walked down the trail. I got to my spot, and I had a styrofoam minnow bucket that I always carried with minnows in it, and I went down there, and I was fishing, got set up and everything, and got my poles out, and I had my lunch with me and a minnow bucket behind me, and I was sitting in a lounge chair, those white lounge chairs, and I'd caught a fish, and I'd walked down the bank. You have to kind of walk down the bank towards the sandbar to reel it in, because if you don't, you'll pull it across a bunch of roots sticking out of the bank, and you'll get it tangled up. So I usually walk down there when I was catching one. And I came back, and my minnow bucket was gone. I had some worms with me, and I had some minnows that I fished with down there. And I got to looking for my minnow bucket, and I couldn't find it anywhere. And I walked around the bank and walked down the bank a little bit, didn't see it anywhere. Couldn't figure out what happened to it. And it was kind of strange. The bucket just vanished, but I never did find it. So I fished a little longer with just regular red worms that day, and then I packed up and went back, and kind of stayed on my mind what could have happened to it, because it just disappeared. And a couple days later, probably about a week later, I'm guessing, I was back, and I had another minnow bucket, and I went to the same spot. I was by myself again. I had a buddy of mine that was supposed to come down later, and he did come down later that day, but I was already there. Then I was fishing again that day, and I caught another fish and went down the bank and come back, and the lid was off my minnow bucket. And it was just a little styrofoam minnow bucket that had a wire handle on it that you carried it with. And I thought that was kind of strange, because there wasn't any wind blowing or anything else. So started thinking, well, somebody's in here and they're playing a joke on me or something. They're taking my bucket, the lid off or something. So didn't think much about it. My buddy came down that day and he and I fished, and he stayed 3 or 4 hours and he hit it on back, and they weren't really biting that good that day. And I stayed, and it was pretty close to dark, and this was in the springtime. A storm started coming in. I could see a storm coming. It was getting kind of windy, and I could tell it was about to probably come a thunderstorm. And the water was, I could tell it by the water too, the way the wind was blowing on it. And I went down to the bank to get my stringer, my fish stringer that I tied off down there, and my fish, and I came back, and my minnow bucket was gone. The whole thing was gone like the first time that I was down there, that it disappeared. And I started thinking, now this is really strange. I've lost one minnow bucket, so I'm thinking, well, maybe the wind blew it in, because the wind was blowing pretty hard. And I looked down the river and around the bank. I did not see anything. And those styrofoam buckets are not going to sink. They're going to float. Well, I never found that one. And the next time, I went ahead and packed my stuff up and went on. And I was down there again a couple weeks later and brought another minnow bucket. Well, this time when I brought it, I had tied a string, a small rope, not really a string, onto the wire part of it where you pick it up with. And I took that string and tied it around a tree that was behind the minnow bucket where nothing could drag it off or take it. And continued fishing. And I was fishing by myself this day too. Fished for a good while and had a pretty good day, caught quite a few fish. And I went back to caught a fish, and I went down the bank like I normally do, and I put it on the stringer, and I came back up and with my fishing pole and hook, and I went to get a minnow, and my minnow bucket was like something had pulled it. There's a little trail there that continues going that you can walk on down the side of the river, but it's real hard to go any further because it gets real thick. A lot of ivy and trees and tree limbs, and it's just real thick. It's hard to get through there. I'd tried to walk down there before, and it's just too hard to walk down there, especially with your equipment, because it's so thick with undergrowth. But the trail led down into that area, and this, whatever it had, I couldn't figure out what had happened, but something had taken the minnow bucket and tried to go down the trail with it, and the string was pulled from the tree tight to the minnow bucket, and the minnow bucket was tipped over just a little bit, and there was water on the trail spot there, quite a bit of water where it spilled out of the bucket, and just about all the minnows were gone. So I started thinking, well, somebody's playing somebody's here and they're taking my minnows, and I had never thought that it was a creature. Somebody's here playing a joke, or somebody's watching me or something. And so I went and got the bucket and brought it back, and when I looked down, this area is kind of muddy anyway, like the riverbanks are. I'm not talking about muddy where you get on down next to the water. Now you'll get in deeper mud, but this is kind of a muddy area. Just walking around and leave your footprints. And that water had spilled on that little trail, and it's mainly dirt. It's not any grass in it. There's some sticks and things like that in it, but it's mainly dirt. And I looked down that trail, I started thinking, what could have pulled my minnow bucket? And I looked around the trail there, and I seen a footprint. And it was just a little ways from where the minnow bucket had been pulled to with the string tight. And that string was probably about 5 feet from the tree to the bucket. And it had pulled it as far as it could, whatever it was. And I seen a track. And it looked like a human foot track, actually. It wasn't like a size 20 or anything crazy like like I've actually seen out in the woods when I did a lot of researching, and I thought that was kind of strange. I thought, well, somebody is, this is not in the middle of nowhere where I'm talking about I'm fishing. It's in the country, but it's awful close to a mall and everything else. I'm within 5 miles from a mall and a populated area. And, of course, it's really thick and it's all growed up. You go down that riverbank, it goes for miles, and there's just lots of acres with nothing in there but undergrowth. And when I seen that track, I knew then that somebody was down there. I didn't think it was a creature or it was a Bigfoot. I thought somebody was down there and they were trying to get my minnows. So I got to looking down the trail and I looked around and I actually crawled down in there a little ways. I couldn't walk down in there. And I seen more tracks. But I didn't go any further. I went ahead and got my stuff and I left. So the next time that I came down there was probably a few days because I was real curious to see what this was or who was doing this. So this time I brought my gun with me, my shotgun, and my equipment and setup and everything. And I put my minnow bucket same place with the rope on it, and I was really more trying to see what was getting my minnow bucket than I was fishing. And I got everything set up like I was fishing, and something caught my eye. I don't know, kind of like your peripheral vision. I was facing the river, and to my left is where the trail was. Caught my eye, and I looked down the trail real quick, and I seen this creature down on it, kind of crouched down the trail. It was probably maybe, I couldn't see real far down in there because it bent around. It was a pretty good ways down, maybe 40 or 50 yards. But I seen a creature that it was kind of crouched down, and it was looking out of the brush at me, and then it would sway back in with its head. And I knew then what I was looking at. It was a Bigfoot. And immediately I got scared because I remembered back 7 years before, but this creature didn't look like the one I'd seen before. It just swayed out of the brush, and had one foot on the trail, and it was crouched, and I could see the lower part of its body, but I couldn't see I could see the lower part, but not actually the chest. I could just see the head because it was in the brush, and it would sway out and look at me and go back in. So I had my gun with me, and I walked down in there about as far as I could go, about where I'd seen it setting, and that was hard to get to because it was so low. The brush, it was so, I was too tall to get to where it was at, and without crawling on my hands and knees. And I seen over in the bushes to my left, real close to where the creature was my minnow bucket that I'd lost. And the top was on the other side, laying on the ground, and then I looked to the right, and there was the other minnow bucket that I'd lost. I felt like these were my minnow buckets. They looked like the ones I'd lost. And then I knew then this is what had gotten my minnow bucket. But this was not a huge one. This was more like a juvenile type creature. It wasn't a full-grown one. I'm guessing it never stood up. I didn't see that, but it wasn't a real big one, but it definitely looked different than the first one I'd seen. It was more like the patty type that I was talking about. It was not as dark black. It was black, but it was between black and brown. And so then my thought was, well, there's Bigfoots in here. I had no idea that they would have lived in there, but they did. So I came back the next day without my fishing gear, and I brought a little piece of wood that I cut with a saw, and there was a tree in there pretty close to where I could stand up before I had to duck down, and it had limbs on the bottom, and I actually the limbs were fairly low to the ground, so I put that piece of wood on the tree, and I wedged it in there real good where it was tight with that piece of wood, and it had little edges on it where nothing would roll off, and I put several apples, and I believe I put a banana there, and I left. And right below that, I checked the ground before I left. It was fairly muddy, enough where I could see something trying to get it. So came back the next day, and all the fruit was gone. And there was a lot of tracks right below the tree there, mud track, pretty good tracks, good enough to cast. I wish I had cast them, but I didn't. I don't even think I knew where to get casting material at that time. But I knew there was one there. I didn't know how many was there. So I started gifting these creatures. I was going there sometimes every other day, sometimes every day. I was making a trip down there in the morning. I'd go early in the morning. And I gifted these things for a pretty good while. I'm over a year I was going down there. Sometimes I would get busy and I'd skip a week, and then I didn't go back daily. And I found out what kind of stuff they liked and what they didn't like. And I actually ended up seeing 3 down there. I never seen one that was very large. I seen one that was, the biggest one I seen was probably about 5 or 6 foot tall. And they weren't, I may have been seeing juveniles, but I think it was probably about my 5th or 6th trip, about the 5th or 6th month I've been doing this. I went to the store and bought some plastic whistles, and I went to a dime store close by that used to be there, and there was a little bag of, I was just looking around for some type of gifts to give them, and I seen these whistles, and they had, I think there was like 8 or 9 of these things in a little plastic bag, and they weren't very much, but it had a string that was attached to every one of the whistles. There's a little red string. And I took that back, and I hung all those whistles in the trees there, in different trees. I hung those little whistles up. And it was a day or two before I got back. And I sat down, I carried my chair, and I sat down fairly close to it, and I had my gun with me. And it wasn't my shotgun. It was a pretty powerful pistol. It was my brother's .357 Magnum. And I didn't want to harm them, but I didn't want them to harm me either. But I sat down in the chair, and I probably sat there 3 or 4 hours. It was on a Saturday morning, and I could hear whistles. Honestly, it was actually kind of funny. I could hear whistles way off down the bank. I don't know how far down, but just far enough you could barely hear the whistle. But these things were in the woods, and they had taken 3 or 4 of those whistles, so apparently 3 or 4 different creatures, and they were blowing those whistles all over that wooded area down there. So then I knew they were intelligent. I thought, well, these things they're not stupid. They know how to blow a whistle. So that went on for, like I said, probably almost 2 years. And I started going down. I kept going down there, and I even took a friend with me. And he really didn't want to go, but he wanted to see one of them. And I took him down there, and we didn't see one that day. But they never came out and came close to me. They were always I guess probably the closest one got to me was 50 yards maybe down that trail. It would come out and look at me and just stick his head in and out and just look at me. But I did take a couple friends down there eventually, but I'm not sure if one of them ever really seen one clear like I did when I was there by myself. But they started to get closer to me. I mean, they were getting closer into where I was sitting, and like I said, none of them were large. I don't know if these were just juveniles and there were large ones. I'm sure there were large ones down there somewhere. But I went down there one morning to gift them, and this was like on a Friday. Last time I was down there, it seemed like I'd skipped the weekend, and I went down there, and there was all kinds of whistles blowing that morning. I could hear them blowing. Now, when they heard me in the weeds or the bushes trying to see them, they would stop. But they were blowing these whistles all down the riverbank. And I think, if I remember right, I hung up 7 or 8 of them. I didn't hear 7 or 8 blowing, but I heard at least 3 or 4 at one time. And they were in different areas. You could tell that by the noise it was making. And that really was the best thing that I could have ever done, because it relieved so much of the fear I had in me. Because I'd lived with that fear so long. And I was realizing this may not be the same type of Bigfoot that I've seen, but it is a Bigfoot, and these creatures don't seem to be. They may have been harmful if you got real close to them, or one of the bigger ones that come out, but they never tried to harm me while I was down there. They did. I knew they were looking at me. I could catch glimpses of them through the thick underbrush and see them moving around in there, but I couldn't get a real good view of them until they come out on this little trail. So I didn't go down there for probably about a week. I can't remember. It may not have been quite that long, but I went down there one morning, and I was thinking I was getting close enough to where I could possibly get pictures of them. That was my thought. I had one of those old Kodak cameras, you know what I'm talking about, where you push the button and the film come out, and it automatically develops right.
Polaroid.
Right when I got there that morning, this was about a week since I'd been there, maybe a little less. Either the county or the state, or maybe even the sewer plant, had taken bulldozers and all kinds of excavating equipment, and all that area was completely cleaned out, right where all this brush was. It was just gone. It was leveled. You could see all types of pieces of trees and everything else they had cut, and I never seen the creatures again. So I don't know if they took them out knowing they were there, or somebody told them they were there, or maybe the creatures moved on down further. I don't know, but I never seen them again after that. So that was my second time that I'd encountered one.
And when you encountered these, it sounds like, okay, like the first one you encountered was, you said 7 years before these other ones?
The first one I encountered was November the 6th of 1992.
92.
Yeah, this was somewhere around 98 or 99.
So it was several years later. But you weren't afraid of these like you were the first one.
Well, I was afraid of them. I was afraid of it at first when I'd seen what it was, when I seen that creature kind of squatted down in the bushes and sticking its head out, because I knew it was a Bigfoot. So that's why I had brought my gun back with me the next time. I was a little leery to go down there, but I was at the same time, I was kind of curious, because it didn't look like the creature that I'd seen the first time. I realized that it was a Bigfoot, but I didn't feel the fear that I had from the first one. And I really think that helped me out more than anything I could have ever done, because I went down there and gifted. I spent a lot of money taking these. I took them everything. I took them anywhere from fruits to. I found out that they loved bacon. I'd take them bacon. They loved it. There were a lot of things I found out about them. And they left me things too at times. They'd leave me a stick stuck in the ground, or nothing, no type of thing that it would be, like I left them, but it'd be some type of rocks, couple rocks laying where I was sitting, where I put my chair, or a stick in the ground or something. Or sometimes some little patterns of sticks, but I didn't feel fear, no, and it was a different type of creature. I don't know. I'm no expert by any means. I've just learned by experience, but it was probably, I don't know if there's smaller ones or what. These weren't big, and like I said, they may have been juvenile. I've never seen a large one down there, but they were definitely Bigfoot creatures. They weren't monkeys. They were Bigfoot creatures. I'm thinking juveniles, the ones that I witnessed. I'm sure there were bigger ones in there, but I've never seen any of those. They didn't scare me. No, not. I wouldn't say didn't scare me. I was alert and aware, and I did carry a large weapon with me, just in case one of them did try to harm me, but they never did.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't.
Yeah, I am too. But I really think if I hadn't have done that, having, I'm a pretty religious guy. I wouldn't say I'm a devout churchgoer, but I'm definitely a Christian, and God has done a lot for me, and I truly believe that that there was a purpose for me being there. I know that it relieved so much fear in me that I had all those years. Even though it was a different type of Bigfoot, I didn't feel nearly as scared after going down there for a while, because they didn't try to harm me, and they almost seemed friendly. They almost seemed like they wanted to friend me, but they were scared of me as I was of them. And they would never get close enough. They were getting closer, but they never got close enough for me to actually really see them real well. But I've seen them well enough several times. I've seen them well enough to see what they looked like. And they were nothing like the first creature I seen.
What did their faces look like, Darrell?
Their faces looked more like like I said, more like the Patty one. The hair was a lot different than the first one I seen. It was more kind of coarse looking. The hair was more stiff, more like coarse looking. It was not just stuck to their bodies like the first one. It was more sticking out, and it was a lot more hair, and more hair looking than the first one I'd seen, where it looked more like fur more than hair. But they just looked different. Their bodies were similar looking, but I know they had their around their mouth area. I remember that real well. It was different looking. It looked more like lips around the mouth than the first one did. The first one, it's around its mouth area was so black that it was really hard to see the lips. But these had more of a colored type lip around the fur or the hair than the other one did. And their teeth were pretty similar to a human's too, what I could tell. They weren't. I never seen any canines or anything like that in any of the ones I seen. But they looked. Their head was like a taller head than the first one, and the brow line back was more like the cone or the protruding head line back, like you've seen in the Paddy type creature. And looking these up, this looks like actually it's called the Type 41 by looking up the pictures I looked at just a few weeks ago, showing a friend the different types of Bigfoots that I pulled up. I think it was number 41 and number 44 that looked more like them, which is still similar like the Type 1 Paddy looking one, except the face was a little darker than the Paddy one. But the fur was similar looking to the Paddy one, or the hair, or whatever you want to call it. it wasn't laid down like the first one I seen, like it was dirty or matted and just pushed down. This was more like standing out. It looked like it was more separated. You could actually see skin on these. For the first one, I couldn't see skin, except on the hands and area around the face, but it was so dark, it didn't look like skin, it looked like leather. These didn't look like that.
Right. So you mentioned earlier that you also had a dogman sighting. What you think was a dogman sighting, Darrell? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Where it happened, when it happened, and what happened?
Well, I actually had a third Bigfoot sighting that was what that's really important to my Bigfoot because that's what made me stop researching. So,
okay.
If you want me to tell that, if you don't, I will.
Sure.
Sure. I started doing a lot of research after these creatures, and around 2000, I did a lot of research and actually formed a 3 or 4 team, and we went out and in areas and people would call me, or I knew a lot of people around my area. And there's a lot of Bigfoot around the area that I live in the Robertson County area. Got a lot of calls up that way, but we did a lot of research around that area. Found a lot of tracks, a lot of same type of stuff you find everywhere. But Billy Howell, that's a close friend of mine that I've known a long time, and Martin also knows Billy too. Billy's just a great guy. He became my #1 research partner, and he's a former state Golden Glove boxing champion. Just always been a great guy, but just tough as a nail. And he and I've been friends for years. And he called me up in 2017, and he said, "Hey, David, a friend of ours, a guy we went to school with, he said he's got big problems and he wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, have him call me." And he called me up, and we got together and went down to his place. He lived down in Cheatham County, which is about 30 miles from my farm in Robertson County, Ridgetop. So he had Bigfoot that were coming to his house, and he lived down in Cheatham County, not far from the Cumberland River, right next to the backup waters of the Cumberland River. He lived right on that. There's actually a swamp off to the left of him where we actually did some research, and Billy and I. But Billy had been down there. This was in 2017. He'd been deer hunting down there, and he had a ground blind. And he was hunting one morning right at daylight, and a huge Bigfoot walked right in front of his game blind. And David had told him that he had seen him in there, but it scared Billy pretty bad because he was deer hunting, and this thing walked. We actually had a picture of this, and I don't know if Billy still got it or not. We actually put it, if I remember right, we showed a lot of people that picture, and it ended up everywhere. So I don't even know if it's still out there now or not. So we quit putting pictures out because people were claiming they were theirs and they weren't all this and they were our pictures. So, but anyway, to quit dragging on with that, Billy and I went down there and we did some researching back behind his house. David drives a diesel truck, and he leaves on Sunday evening, and he doesn't get back. He runs from Nashville to New York, and it's a week run to get up there and back, and he's home on the weekend. But his girlfriend lives there in his house while he's gone, and these creatures were coming to her house and coming to the house while he was gone and stealing vegetables and things off the deck of their house and looking through the window at her at night, scaring her to death. So he called Billy and I and wanted us to see if we could do anything about it and come down there. So we went down there, and we were down there all the way up to late 2020. But we stayed down there, and we started trying to figure out where they were coming in at. And we found all kinds of evidence and found a pretty good spot to where they were coming regularly. And we set up a gifting area there and started putting stuff out for them. And we did that for Billy would go down and put stuff out, and I would go down. We would kind of swap up because it was a pretty good drive for both of us. We didn't go every day. We would go 2 or 3 times a week. And they were taking everything that we had, and we found tracks, and we put cantaloupes out. They love cantaloupe, and actually we've got pictures of the cantaloupe they eat. Massive set of teeth where these things a bit of cantaloupe in half. I think it's about 6 inches across there. But they liked that the best, and they would eat about 2 pounds of bacon every time we would carry it down there. They liked it. But we were down there several times, and Billy seen the big one. I never seen the big one. He did. He's seen it twice. And David that lived there seen it also next to his garage. The garage is back behind his house, and then it goes into the woods. And off to the left is a swamp and a field in front of it. And then it runs to the backup water to the Cumberland River. But off in that swamp area, Billy and I had found a huge stack of trees they had pushed up on this game trail. And it was just piles of them all the way down through there to a certain area where it made a turn. And there were all kinds of deer hide down there, bones. They had run these deer into this funnel area, and they were catching them and eating them. And Billy found more than I did, but I found quite a few down there. This was a regular thing going on. They were eating these deer. And the game trail wasn't very far from where we set the gifting station up. And so we started going down there at night pretty regular. We would go out in the woods behind his garage, probably 200 yards back to where we had our gifting spot. And we'd sit in the dark in the middle of the night. And I'd get about 50 yards from Billy. He'd be downhill, and we had a FLIR, and we also had a weapon, both of us, and we heard these things come in regularly. We couldn't see them. It was so dark, but you could hear them breaking limbs, and they were close to us several times. And we did that for just about every weekend for a long time, and I actually did see a female, and I seen a juvenile, and Billy seen those several times too. But the thing that got me was the more he went, the stranger it got. The last 2 weeks the last 2 weekends I was down there, the week before that, I had called Charlie Raymond, who I knew Charlie, and you may know Charlie Raymond. He's KB, Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization. I knew Charlie quite a while. And Charlie came down and stayed with us, and he actually brought a friend. He camped there for 3 or 4 nights. He stayed there. And they were all around his tent at night. He could hear them knocking over pans and everything else. And Charlie's one of those kind of guys that goes into the woods with no weapon. And they were in the tent. They could hear them, but they didn't go out. And I don't know how many they've seen of them, but they did witness some things. So the week after Charlie left, Billy and I went down there, and we were set up in the woods again. I was at a tree, and Billy was at a tree to the left of me. And over down to our gifting spot, the tree I was at was probably about 6 yards. And straight ahead of me was a little dip, and it went up on a rise. And I was sitting at the tree, and I seen something that looked like only way I can describe it, and Billy would tell you the same thing. It looked like a light bulb I mean, I'm talking about it was glowing that white. It looked like a large light bulb. It came down approximately about 100 yards in front of us through the woods. It walked down. It came down on the ground, and it was walking right toward me. I watched this thing coming toward me for a good 15 or 20 minutes. It was very slow, but it was moving slowly, and it was going like a light bulb. And it got almost to the tree next to me. It was walking right to me. And I pulled out my gun, and I was ready to fire on it because I didn't know what it was. Well, Billy had a real bright flashlight, and he got his flashlight on and shined it over there where it's at. And this sounds crazy, but this thing turned into a possum. And Billy can tell you the same thing. It went from a glowing light, like a light bulb, into a possum. And then when it did, it turned around and walked back in the same direction of where it came from. And when it arrived, we could actually see it moving in the dark. Well, about 30 minutes later, these huge, these were about the size of a beach ball. Two large balls about the size of a beach ball came down from the same area this possum went to. Somewhere from in the sky, it came, I don't know, we didn't see it in the sky, we seen it coming through the trees. But it came down, and these two balls that were about the size of a beach ball just stopped and hovered about maybe a foot off the ground, and they were right next to each other, and they were pulsating. You can see like lights inside of them. Hard to explain, but they were pulsating red, orange, and pink. Both of them were. They were right next to each other. So I got pretty weirded out about it. Billy was feeling kind of strange too, because we'd never seen anything like this thing. We sat and watched these things for probably about 20 or 25 minutes, and they started coming toward us just a little bit, and then they started going to the left, and they were above the ground. They were going down the hill toward the gifting spot. So Billy and I decided it was time to go. So we got up and went down the trail and went back out to the driveway where his truck was parked. And there's a gravel road that goes back around down there that looks over into those woods where we were sitting at. And we drove the truck down there, and we watched those balls, whatever they were, we watched them from that gravel road. It's an old gravel road over there that overlooks those woods. And we watched those things go all the way through the woods until they went completely out of sight. I don't know what they were. I've never seen anything like that, but I do have pictures of those. I took about 100 pictures of my phone, and I got 3 or 4. But
so what you're describing is what other people would call orbs, Darrell?
Right. But I've never seen orbs. Okay. I mean, I hadn't seen an orb that's this big. But so at this point, we were pretty weirded out down there because we didn't know what we were getting into, because we had been hearing the Bigfoot, and seeing them in the daytime, but when we could hear them moving around, but we had never seen those type things down there. So we went back the next week. I was a little skeptical, and he was too. We were kind of weirded out by it. So the next weekend we went back, and we actually got in his ground blind, the one he seen the Bigfoot out of. We got in it on the ground in the same area. We moved it over to there and got in it. It was about 11:30 at night when we got there. And we got set up. And it wasn't long after we got there. Over to the left where the swamp is, in front of it, there's a field, a sage grass field that goes about 300 yards back in there, and then it turns into woods. We heard the coyotes coming, a big pack of coyotes, and they were loud. They were really loud. And Billy had a FLIR, and I would take it and look at it. You could see them running. You could just catch parts of the heat when they would get between the sage. And they were barking, chasing something. And then all of a sudden they stopped and it's just like they disappeared. They weren't anywhere. I mean, they weren't in the FLIR. They completely quit barking. And then to the left of us, next to the swamp, we heard 3 large, loud tree knocks. Then up to the right on the hill, the right of me, I heard 3 more tree knocks. And then, all of a sudden, there was these white, tiny balls about the size of a softball flying in and out of the trees. There was about 4 or 5 of those. They were just flying in and out of the trees at a pretty good rate of speed, flying around us and in between the trees. And they would go back into the woods and disappear. We were watching those things. Me and him both started getting sick. I felt sick at my stomach, and I don't ever get sick at my stomach, and he did too. And I started to get a headache. Then about that time, our vehicles are about 300 yards behind us. It's a house back there. All 3 of my truck alarm, his truck alarm, and David, the gentleman who lived there, his truck alarm, all 3 of the truck alarms went off at the same time. And they were loud, like how an alarm goes off in a car. And about that time, we heard the lady back there screaming, and we took off running back toward the house. And these truck alarms were going off, and we couldn't get them to stop. We actually got in the vehicle, started the truck, and the truck alarms were still going off. They went off for about 30 minutes, all 3 trucks. My cell phone was completely dead. His cell phone was completely dead. My watch had stopped completely. It wasn't even working. And when we cut the trucks off, we couldn't get them to start back. And on the back of his truck, David's truck, there was a huge handprint, about 5 big hands. They were probably about twice the size of mine. 2 big handprints on the back of the tailgate. And we tried our best the next day to get those trucks' alarms to go off. All 3 of us big guys pushing it. We couldn't get the alarms to go off. But that pretty much weirded me out. I didn't care about going down there no more for a while. I wanted to take a break. And my farm is about 30 miles from there. And I was living at my farm by myself at this time. My wife and kids and we had split up for about a year and a half, and they were living in another part of the area. And my kids stayed at the house a lot, but my wife had moved out in her own place. But I started having problems at the house. I never had problems at the house before. I got a pretty good sized farm, and I've got horses, and I've got my house there's pretty large. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, this was about a week after we had seen those orbs and all that the weird stuff that happened about our phones and my watch quitting and all that. And I don't know what that was about, but that was very strange. But 3 o'clock in the morning, something started banging on the side of my house. And I'm not talking about just barely tapping on it. I'm talking about it sounded like somebody was trying to tear the wall down. It was so loud. And I got up in the middle of the night, at 3 o'clock in the morning with my gun and went outside looking, and I didn't see anything. And I walked around the whole house. Well, the next night, same thing happened, except it was on the other end of the house. Something was banging real loud on the side of the house. And then it started banging on both sides of the house. This went on for about a week. And it was every night between 3 o'clock and 4:30. It would happen a couple times. Sometimes I would walk outside. I wouldn't see anything. About the second week, it was still going on. Then my horses got spooked. They were going crazy in my field in front next to my stable. I got up in the middle of the night, went down there with my gun, and they were so scared. They were all the way up next to the driveway. at where the gate opens. Both of those horses were up next to the fence, and they wouldn't even go toward the stable. And I went to the stable and cut the lights on. I didn't see anything out there. The horses refused to go to the stable. I moved them to the other field. After about 3 days, they would never leave that area. They stayed up next to the driveway. And I moved them to the other field on the left side. And this was continuing to go on. I was getting really weirded out because I didn't know what was beating on my house at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. I never heard anything like that. And I couldn't see anything or went out there. It would quit. And then when I'd go back in, it'd be 30 minutes to an hour and it'd start again. So that went on. And then I was having coffee on the front porch. I have a big front porch there. It's real long and big wooden plank front porch. And I've got a lot of sycamore trees right in front of my house, big ones and little ones that go into like a creek bottom before it gets to my barn. And I looked up and the sycamore tree that had been there a good 5 or 6 years, it was probably a foot around. It was up maybe 15 or 20 foot tall. It was a beautiful tree. I looked up and about 8 foot up, the whole top of it was broke. And we hadn't had any storms or any other trees damaged. And I looked at it and I thought, well, how did that happen? And I even walked down there and looked and something had broken. You could see where it was twisted. And I couldn't imagine what would do that. And only one thing came to my mind. I've got a Bigfoot or something here doing this. That's when I realized I thought maybe I did have a Bigfoot. And I know it sounds crazy, and it is crazy, but these things have come to my house. So this kept going on. And I was at the point where I couldn't even sleep at night. I did everything I could to catch what was doing it, but I never seen them. So I had about 20 cats on my farm. Mother cats, we have kittens. I had 20 or 25 of them. And I'd see them every day. Most of them stayed in either the barn or the stable, and I'd have 4 or 5 on the front porch. They all disappeared. There wasn't a cat anywhere. And there wasn't any of them. And every morning when I'd feed, they'd come out to get feed, and all the cat food disappeared. The cats disappeared. The horses were still going crazy at night, even in the other fields. So I moved them up next to the house and tied them off. And they still got spooked, but not as bad. I had a lot of deer at my place that would bed down in my front yard at night. Every night, 4 or 5 deer that down in the mainly young deer or fawns and does. But they'd always sleep in the front yard. I would come home at night and I'd see them laying there. They all disappeared. Didn't see any more deer. Started having stuff disappearing around my house. Stuff damaged, like I had a bird feeder broken half. I had the bird feed gone out of it. I had a pool in my backyard, in-ground pool. The gate was open on it, and the gate's very hard to open. You got to know how to hit the latch right to open it. That gate was open all the time. Just a lot of different things started happening, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I was really getting weirded out with this going on. So I called a good friend of mine named Michael Patterson that I started with him. We started Blue Ridge, Sasquatch, and Crypto back 5 or 6 years ago together. He still has the group on Facebook, and he's in my group, and we're close friends. But he had a lot of stuff that happened to him over the years, and I said, man, this is going on. You got any idea what I ought to do? He says, let's call Scott. So he called Scott Carpenter, and Scott Carpenter and him came up with the idea to rebuke my house. I said, well, okay, what do I do? So I went out and rebuked all four corners of my property, and I did all four corners of the inside of my house, and it all stopped. So I haven't researched since. I've not researched since, and I do 100% believe that those things follow me home somehow, some way. I don't know how, but I believe they did. I did find many tracks around my house later on. My mare had died about a month or two before this all happened, and I had buried her back there with a backhoe, and it was muddy on top of her grave, and I found tracks in that mud. It was a Bigfoot track, too. And my son and I, after this rebuking, they didn't bother my house no more. They didn't have any more banging on the side of my house, and my kids stayed with me over there. A lot of times they would come and stay with me at night, and I'd take them to school, and they'd stay with me on the weekend. My son and I was out playing basketball after all this happened, after it all calmed down. And we have a basketball court that's concrete slab, 25 by 25 with a goal, and we were playing basketball right before dark, and I heard a huge tree crash in the woods right to the right of us, not very far in. It was loud. Wasn't any wind blowing, nothing at all. So I thought, well, that's kind of strange. But then we were on the other end of the house about a week later, and another huge tree crashed in the woods, big one. And I got out and went down to the woods after that, looking around. I found all kinds of tracks in the woods, found tree breaks, also looked like there was something that pushed those trees down. One of them was dead, one of them wasn't very dead. So those things are still living on my farm, but they're not bothering my house. And I never had Bigfoot there that I'm aware of. I've been in those woods plenty of times. I truly believe they follow me home. I know that probably sounds crazy, but I believe that.
No, it doesn't sound crazy at all. So a lot of times when people encounter these creatures, they start having problems in their home, whether it's poltergeist activity or creatures outside. So yeah, it's not crazy at all, Darrell. And it's amazing when you say rebuke, you rebuked the four corners of your house. Was it a prayer that you said?
No, Scott Carpenter had told Michael Patterson, he said that I need to say these words: I rebuke you in the name of Jesus Christ. Leave me and my property alone. And that's what I said. I went to the property. I did all four corners inside the home, and they told me that it worked about 90% of the time, and it did work. There was no more banging going on, nothing missing. They were still there on my property. I think it has something to do with those orbs and all that stuff. Seen those 2 weeks in a row because I didn't go down there anymore, and that's why I don't research anymore. I mean, if I got a friend that calls and said, "Hey, can you come help me? I've seen something," I'll do that. But as far as going in the woods and researching these things or messing with them, I'm not interested.
Right, I don't blame you. So it's amazing what that name, just uttering that one name, can do for you when you're having troubles like this, right?
It really, honestly, Jesus does a lot of things, but it was amazing to me. I mean, it was so scary that my kids wouldn't stay there. All that banging going on, and it was so loud. It actually shook the side of the house, and there wouldn't be anything there.
Well, that should point out to a logical man who's rational. That should point out the true nature of these creatures that you were trying to interact with and give food to and all that, right?
Well, I won't do it again. I learned my lesson with that.
Right. So what my point is that if they're just animals, the name Jesus would have no meaning to them.
Yeah, I mean, like if a lion or a tiger is trying to attack you, I mean, more than likely, just screaming out, like help, Jesus, I'm not saying that it wouldn't work, but like most animals, I mean, that they're not aware, you know what I mean? Like there'll be people that can argue that that's the case, but more than likely
they wouldn't recognize the name at all.
Yeah, they're not gonna.
Right,
they're not gonna know. They're just
Jesus.
animals that live in this physical plane of existence. But a demonic entity is going to recognize Christ right away. I mean, in the Bible, in the New Testament, they recognized Jesus, in the flesh before he even spoke. I mean, like they knew who he was. I mean, it was pretty obvious. So it makes me wonder, well, I don't wonder, but it makes me think that, these things obviously they do have some sort of demonic source or root.
Okay, folks, so that's going to do it for this episode. Tune into the next episode where I return with my guest and with Barton Nunley. And thank you for listening to PRT. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Good night.